Okay. Welcome to the Resume and Cover Letter Lab. We are hoping to do a couple of these this semester to give everybody a chance to get their documents ready for the Legislative Internship Fair in November. As I mentioned, I will cover some of the stuff that I went over in the summer Resume and Cover Letter Lab with some updates to the career fair checklist that you do need to complete for any career fair at LBJ. I'm going to go over some resume basics, some mechanics, some content tips, but I'm going to save a lot of the content tips for the end when we kind of crowdsource some resume edits. I'll definitely go over our cover letter rubric, give some tips for that, and then at the end, like I said, we'll crowdsource tailoring a resume to an internship description, because that is usually the hardest part. So if you are a first-year student, and this is the first year hearing of the career portfolio checklist, then I need to get the word out more, because this is something that you do need to complete before you attend any career fairs at LBJ. The good news is we have streamlined it a lot since we first introduced this initiative. We thought about what we wanted students to be prepared for the most for a career fair in particular. And so while everything on the left used to be on the career fair portfolio checklist, we've narrowed it down to what we think is most important for a career fair, which is your resume, being able to introduce yourself and talk about yourself in a professional way, so mock interview completion, and then you'll need to watch Professor Greenberg's Ledge 101 session to attend the Legislative Internship Fair in November. Professor Greenberg actually recorded this last week. It is live on Canvas. It's pretty short. It's only about 15 minutes, and then you'll take a really quick quiz just to prove that you watched it. The quiz is really easy. I made it. So that's something that's real easy to check off your list now if you're interested in that event. The good news too about the career fair portfolio checklist being streamlined for this semester is that once you complete it, you're good to go for next semester as well. So you have a couple of different options to complete these, except for the Ledge 101 session that you have to watch on Canvas. And then if you'd like, we'll do a live Q&A on the regular session next year. We'll actually do that on October 9th. So Professor Greenberg will be there to answer any questions you have about that. But for the resume, you can always email it to LBJ Careers, and myself, Lauren Berryhill, and Rachel Sanson all manage that account. So we're all there to provide feedback on your resume. If you'd like to make an appointment, you can do it that way as well. I said before that I personally prefer Handshake. It's a really helpful scheduling module in that system. You can also, if you think you're good to go, or maybe we've already met and you've gotten some feedback from us, you can submit your resume for approval via the Enrolled Students page. There is a career fair portfolio checklist assignment and assignments, and it's a real quick document upload. I approved a resume this morning. For the mock interview, you have a couple of options to do it live. You can always do a mock interview with someone from OSA, anyone from OSA, really. Or you can participate in our alumni mock interview day on October 20th. So you can get real-time feedback either from us or from a policy practitioner. But you can also do this on your own time through software called Big Interview. And you can log into Big Interview with your EID credentials by going to, I think it's utexas.biginterview.com, or you can go directly from Canvas to Big Interview. Either way, you need to log into Canvas to find the code in the mock interview assignment to plug into Big Interview so that you get the policy interview. It's about 15 questions, so I recommend setting aside about 30 minutes. And it's a really cool program because once you're done, it gives you immediate feedback that's AI generated on like 5 different aspects of interviewing mechanics, how fast you talk, how much eye contact you make. It even grades your vocabulary. I did one this summer. It was pretty humbling to have my vocabulary graded. But it's really cool, and all you have to do that is complete it. You don't have to wait for feedback from us, although the career and PD team will be going through and providing any feedback that the AI technology doesn't. So those are your options for that. I'm really excited to debut the Canvas module after this weekend. If you guys have any issues, of course, email me and let me know. So getting into the resume mechanics, I'm going to skip over that first bullet point for now because I have a whole slide talking about whether a 1-page or 2-page resume is appropriate for you. I used to be really strict about this, but I have relented quite a bit. I know that LBJ students come from us with all different levels of experience and all different levels of career development, so I'll talk about that a little bit later. But in terms of keeping it clean and simple, I really only recommend using bullet points in your job descriptions to highlight your achievements and not just as a way to facilitate a list of anything. I find that if you overuse bullet points, it tends to look like a grocery list rather than a resume. You also want to make sure that you are using things that make font stand out very sparingly. So if you're going to bold something, don't necessarily italicize whatever's right next to it. So think about what you want to stand out. Do you want your title at a job to stand out, or do you want the title of the organization to stand out? I can see an argument for either one. But the problem with highlighting, or let's say bolding one and italicizing another, and then you've got your headings that are in all caps, is that it can get a little messy, and if you're trying to make everything stand out, then nothing will. And also just making sure that you are not cheating your margins too much, you're not cheating your spacing too much, and that you are prioritizing function and content over design. Oops, I went backwards, okay. This is usually the hardest part, is describing your experience in a way that is both professional, concise, but also highlights your achievements and the skills that you gained rather than just the things that you did. So we'll go over again, we'll kind of do this together with a sample resume and a sample internship description. But in general, you really want to focus on your contribution to your organization's goal, not just what your organization or what your department accomplished. And that's going to be easier with some jobs than others. Some jobs might be relevant and you might want to include them on your resume, but you didn't have a lot of oversight or management responsibilities. And in that case, you want to think about the skill that you gained from doing those activities, as it were. And again, this is hard for everyone, whether you are just beginning your career or you are at the apex. Finding ways to really demonstrate your value in what you did before can be challenging, which is why we're going to do it together at the end. You're going to get a lot of advice on resumes that might be conflicting. I always recommend ask why someone recommends what they do and decide if it's the right advice for you. These I feel like are pretty universal rules. For your job descriptions, you do want to start each of your bullet points with action verbs. That helps you maintain the active voice and avoid things like duties included or responsible for. You don't ever want to use personal pronouns, even if you're including like a summary or a profile at the beginning, so no I, me, or my. And then you also want to make sure that you're being very straightforward with your language. And this might sound a little contradictory to wanting to sound professional and polished, but you are policy students. So you are gaining that skill now, right? And being professional, polished, impactful, and concise all at the same time. And of course, using consistent punctuation, proper punctuation, and consistent verb tense. So you're not switching between past and present in the same, job entry. If you want to list your current job using the present tense verb and all the past and past tense, that's fine. You just don't want to have lots of different tenses floating around all over your resume. Okay, so let's talk about whether a 1-page resume is right for you or a 2-page resume is right for you. It's my favorite discussion. A lot of people will say, come up with an arbitrary number of years of experience. I've heard 5 tossed around a lot, so that if you have 5 full-time years of post-undergraduate experience, then you might be ready for a 2-page resume. My rule is a little bit more basic than that, in that if you have 2 full pages that are formatted well and all relevant to the job that you're applying for, then you're probably ready for a 2-page resume. Of course, there are some exceptions. You want to think about the industry that you're applying for and whether that's a convention that's accepted or not. And whether you want that extra freedom of the 2-page resume that would allow you to go into more detail about your accomplishments in your jobs, but also things like research, coursework, publications, service, organizations, other kinds of leadership. So that's the advantage of a 2-page resume, is that you have more freedom to go into detail about things that you might not traditionally think of as straightforward employment and education, which might be important for the industry that you're applying for. However, a 1-page resume might be more accepted in your industry and is an excellent exercise in being concise and impactful, and making sure that every word on that page is doing you justice, is like earning its keep, basically. So it's a really good editing exercise. I myself have a 1-page version and a 2-page version. I've been doing this for over 10 years. I feel like if I can do it, almost anyone can fit a 1-page resume. So yeah, if you have questions about whether it's right for you, ask today if 2-page resume is right for you. But know that neither one is better than the other. I know that when I've talked to Robin and Bill from the Washington Center, they've said that if you want to work on the Hill, it's important to have a 1-page version. That's a big deal there. So. All right, so more resume mechanics. You don't need to include your address. In fact, I've heard some pretty compelling arguments for not even including your zip code. You want to make sure that the contact information that is easiest to find is the way they're actually going to contact you. So just email and phone number. And you can add your LinkedIn URL as well. The trick is to make this as unobtrusive as possible, especially if you're working with a 1-page resume, because it's valuable real estate that it's taking up. Just like your job or professional experience, you're going to list your education in reverse chronology. You don't need to include your dates attended, just include the dates that you graduated and your expected date of graduation for your graduate degree. Don't be afraid to go into lots of detail with your graduate education, even if this is your 3rd week of class. At LBJ, you guys hit the ground running, and a lot of the courses that you take are directly related to what you're going to be doing in your internship or when you graduate. I also think it's important for industries to know what the LBJ degree really is, and that it is practical and clinical rather than theoretical. So I encourage students to get really detailed with their education section almost immediately. And I always recommend putting your education at the top. As a current student, this is where you're getting your most recent and relevant experience. You don't need to list your high school. In fact, you shouldn't list your high school because that can give away information that the interviewer doesn't want to know yet, your age. And you don't need to include any transfer experience unless there's something notable about it. So if maybe you went to a junior college for a couple years before you went to the institution where you got your degree from to save money, you don't necessarily need to include that. You only need to include the institutions from which you got a degree. If you did an exchange program, or again, there's something really notable about that transfer experience, you might want to include it. Again, I'm going to skip over this. This is kind of underscoring what I said before about really focusing on your academic and research experience while you're a full-time student. In describing your experience, a good formula is action verb plus task plus result. Again, helps you stay focused on your contribution and your skills. Kind of go through this stuff quickly because I do want to get to the cover letter stuff. and I want to get to the interactive piece. For skills, you really only want to focus on, I don't want to say, I don't like the word hard skills, but technical skills, things that you can prove like in one sitting, as opposed to more subjective skills or things that everybody says about themselves, things that are proven over time. You also don't need to list that you're proficient in Microsoft Word. However, if you have some really good Excel skills, those are ones I might go into detail with in the skills section. All right, going through this quickly. Cover letter. Okay, cover letters are a little bit more difficult to provide lots of mechanics on because there is a lot that goes into them that's going to be different. They're subjective as well, but I feel like this is a pretty good formula for getting started. Taking your elevator speech or how you would introduce yourself to someone who's in a position to give you a job. In the intro, make it very concise and tie it to the job that you're applying for. Then use the body of your resume to expand on that intro. And then in the conclusion, finish up with connecting your career goals to the organization's goals. And yes, you're going to tailor your cover letter for each position that you apply for, just like you're going to tailor your resume for each position that you're going to apply for, but you're not going to have to start from scratch. In fact, a lot of things are going to be similar, especially with the intro and the conclusion. You might pick different examples to go into detail with in the body of your cover letter, but don't panic about writing, 20 different cover letters, because in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about internship advising and how many internships you should be applying for. It's a lot of cover letters, but again, you won't have to start from scratch for each one. In the opening paragraph, don't start it with "my name is." They know what your name is. If you can find a way to start it with something other than "I am applying for" or "I am submitting my application for," bonus points. It's just a more effective, impactful way of opening up the cover letter. My cheat, because I have a hard time starting them, is this: as a Master of Public Affairs student, as a veteran of career counseling. It helps me, again, introduce myself without starting with personal pronoun. In the body paragraph, I think the important thing to take away is that you're not restating your resume. This is a supplement to your resume. This is your chance to kind of show off that you can communicate, again, in a professional, polished way that's straightforward, impactful, and concise. So you want to use this as an opportunity to maybe include things that you didn't necessarily get to include in your resume. So what was your decision making in choosing your past experiences, or why do you want to apply for this particular position? What is it specifically about your skills and experience that you feel will be a good match for this organization? And then the closing paragraph, you're kind of summarizing, saying you're looking forward to being interviewed and all of that good stuff. But I also find that this is a good opportunity to connect your personal career mission to the mission of the organization. I find that that is a really strong closing. I wouldn't necessarily recommend using this exact wording because I have seen it show up, not necessarily like obviously important details changed, but I've seen it show up in a couple of cover letters since we included it in the cover letter rubric. But this is an example of how you can close your cover letter connecting both. So while I am proud of my professional and academic achievements, my passion for research and advocating for climate pollution solutions is the most influential factor in my career planning. I can think of no more important work than what BPM is doing, no better place to contribute my skills and experience. Please accept my resume in consideration for the policy and government relations internship. I am picking up typos all over this, so please don't copy and paste this. Okay. And all right, so next, any questions so far about resume and cover letter mechanics?
I have a quick question.
Sure, let's hear it.
Sorry?
Sorry, I said let's hear it.
So my question regarding a resume is, I mean, this will differ between a probably a one page or a two-page resume format, but in let's say in the sense of 2 pages, what do you feel about including something that's not necessarily relevant, but just to include like continuity of like employment, or I guess experience in a certain sense, like even if something's not relevant, like putting something that will kind of fill in like a year gap, for example, or a couple 6 month gaps.
Can you give me an example of something that you feel like is not relevant?
um
I guess my reason is that if it's what you did instead of work or school, it's probably relevant because you probably did it to contribute to something,
yeah,
right?
I guess I was taking it more in like, not to say it's not relevant, but in the sake of brevity, is it better to even include some non-relevant things? I don't know, I'm having a hard time trying to figure out a specific example, but I guess just like comparing, like adding, I guess the real question is cutting stuff out for the sake of brevity, but showing some gaps in a resume, whereas you would maybe include something else that's not as relevant just to show more of a continuity of,
I see. So you're
like,
asking, is it better to eliminate all gaps of employment or is it better to focus only on what's relevant?
yes.
I mean, I think that's going to depend, but what you can do if you're just including it for the sake of continuity and for the sake of not having gaps on your resume is collapse any description of it. So say you took a part-time gig as like a receptionist at an advocacy office and you're like, well, I want them to know that I was like still working in advocacy, but it was part-time and I didn't have a lot of responsibility. You can just include the title and where you worked and the dates of employment. And so it doesn't take up as much space, but you still have that on there if that's really important. I also, as a graduate student, your resume is going to have some gaps because your schedule, at least for the next couple of years, is going to change every 4 months. So you have a little bit more flexibility as a current student and as a recent grad than you might later in your career to have those gaps.
Okay.
I have a question also.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on bullet points in cover letters? Because I know some people really push that.
I hate it personally. I think it's cheating. I think you have this opportunity to, again, showcase your professional communication skills. You have this opportunity to be more narrative and talk about motivations and talk about things that you can't in a cover letter. Why would you just copy and paste bullet points from a cover or from a resume? I'm sure that there are industries that appreciate having it very easy to read that way. But I am very strongly anti. And in fact, if you had submitted one like that back when we made everybody get their cover letter approved, I would not have approved it.
Okay, good to know.
So, not a fan. Any other questions before we move on to the interactive piece? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Okay. And is this easy enough for everyone to see? The job description?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'd like you to do is take about 30 seconds to read it, and then in the chat, I want you to list any skills or experience that you think it would be important to have reflected in a resume that you would apply for this job. And kind of at the same time, I want you to think about skills that you would like to gain as a graduate student or feel like you're already gaining, or maybe that you have already. So yeah, use the chat function, list skills that you think look important. And they don't have to be even necessarily technical or policy skills. They can also be what are traditionally thought of as soft skills. Great, so we have technical writing, proven interest in Africa and international development, whether in the form of past internships or classes taken, got the research, hard skills, organized writing, research, analytical writing, communication skills. Great. This one caught my eye too. Okay, anything else? I think this one too. So a lot of like writing, reading, communication, research, presentation skills, good one. All right, so now I'm gonna pull up sample resume. And let's look at the chat. And let's start with technical writing. Now, where might you have technical writing expressed, displayed? And you can chat or you can just speak up. What's one place we can include it? Because I think there are a couple of places we can include it.
Well, you could include it in your professional experience. It looks like specifically under like the editor/research team leader portion.
Yeah, so you could turn it into a bullet point. How might you express that? Like if you had to come up with a bullet point that included technical writing experience. I know this is kind of off the top of your head because you weren't actually the research team leader at the governor's office, but
you could say something along the lines of synthesize large amounts of information for consumption by actors at multiple levels.
Yeah, excellent. That's great. Because it's not just like cut and dry, like executed technical writing. It's actually describing and painting a picture of what technical writing is. Where else might it be included?
Under skill summary as a bullet point, potentially.
Mm-hmm. I could see it there. Maybe also if you were listing coursework, or if it was something you did for a research project. All right. How about this one? This one's a little harder. Proven interest in Africa and international development, whether in the form of past internships or classes taken. Well, I guess it's not that hard when it tells you exactly where we could put it. But if you didn't do an internship involving Africa and international development or take classes, where else might you include it? And I know I'm kind of cheating by pulling this up, but.
I think you could. I mean, development tends to be similar in some aspects, even if it's like local versus international. So you could, make a connection somewhere if you were doing a, what was it? Maybe the policy document for keeping increase in property value. I don't know, something that, is similar to international development. You can say you can make the connection between work that was done at the state level versus international.
So focusing more on the like transferable skills and the transferable or the overlapping policy areas.
Yeah, the overlapping policy areas, or even if like development, the development was not done specifically in Africa, you can make the connection between the theories and the type of skills needed to work with development.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What about staying organized to stay on top of deadlines and balancing multiple projects?
I would imagine you could talk about, you're probably balancing a ton of deadlines as a policy research team leader, or, as a White House intern. You would highlight that, you're working in a mad environment, and it is up to you to juggle a whole lot of that stuff.
So, not to put you on the spot, but how would you turn that into a bullet point? Let's say for policy research team leader.
As well, okay. Led a team of, led a team of blank size and balanced deadlines to keep everybody on track as we completed this research paper.
Yeah, I like that. Maybe you could add something about competing priorities.
Yeah, well, you could tie in the, work corresponding with the nonprofits, as well as working with the team. So it's like, keeping up correspondence with all these actors and the competing deadlines and everything like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, sorry, another tangential question there. Would it be like, again, maybe this is me just overreading into the importance of brevity, but would not, like, especially if you're applying to an organization that is very similar to the experience, say like an editor, if you're the editor or the research team leader and you're applying to another editor and research team leader position, like if you're just like, I managed a team of 20 people and we did this, this, and this, like, is there a need to like list out those skills, or would it not be like, oh, well, if you were in this position, then you obviously had to have these things, you obviously had to do these things.
So you're saying that what we might read as an accomplishment is really more of a duty because it's going to be the same no matter where you are for that particular role?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of specific, and I know it'll change in different things. But yeah, I guess that is kind of my question, like, as far as like time management or able to juggle multiple projects at once, like if you're an editor at the Texas governor's office, like, you're going to obviously be managing a ton of projects. That's just kind of the nature of the role. So I guess like, so in that instance, for example, if you're applying to another editor-in-chief position, like, could you not just keep that's like an inherent role of the job, or is it helpful to kind of flesh out some of those skills?
I think it's helpful to flesh out some of those skills. If that's a skill that they think is important and they've listed it, then yeah, I would want that expressed somehow. If you're worried about it being rote, thinking of the ways that you completed those things that were in some way outstanding. Maybe you were commended on them. Maybe you did one thing faster or better. That might help, especially if you were, say, editor and research team leader for like 3 different organizations. And so that top bullet point isn't going to change much, that global description. Then you could potentially focus on how you became subject matter expert in one area, or how maybe interacting with the different departments in each organization gave you a different perspective or a different skill. I think that as you get further in your career, you are going to have things that are similar and feel less like accomplishments and more like, well, that's just part of the job. But focusing on, what you're bringing with you, I guess, what you're taking away from it.
Okay.
We're almost at 1 o'clock. Are there any other questions about resume or cover letter or the career portfolio checklist?
Yeah, I have a question. Well, as far as I understand, you suggest that we're supposed to reformulate the requirements and just put it in other words. But I know that in some companies, and especially in large organizations, the first step, like your CV is not seen by a real person, but rather by an IA, and they just look for specific words to match. And if they don't match, then you just won't pass. And so, how do you find this balance between reformulating and highlighting your unique experience and writing the same words from the requirements?
That's a good question, and I get that question often, especially in the context of applicant tracking systems. Is that what you mean by AI or IA? Oh yeah, of course. I don't know why I didn't put that together. And ultimately, a person is going to read your resume, even if the AI is the first thing to read your resume. So you don't want to just cram it full of buzzwords, but I guess the best thing to do is kind of what we just did. Pull up that job description, highlight what you think are going to be the words that they're going to be looking for, and make sure that they're reflected somewhere in your resume. I think you just want to push past the instinct to just list them somewhere, list them in a skills summary, or just make them as easy for the AI to read them versus the actual person. And ideally, your resume is going to be cut and dry and maybe even kind of boring, because you do want to get the content across. But ideally, the person who makes the actual decision about hiring you is going to be looking a lot closer at your documents, including your cover letter. So I know that's not the most straightforward answer, but I think that was kind of part of the idea of that exercise, is how do we include, the stat of the SPSS, but also if they're looking specifically for the words analytical writing and presentation, how do we find the ways to put those in there that actually make sense for this document and for a human to read as well? But that also, I think, stresses the importance of networking so that you don't have to go through the AI ATS process as often. You can submit the documents the way that everybody does, but then also have maybe an alumni connection you can pass your resume along to as well. Any other questions? All right, well, again, thank you all for joining me. I'm gonna record this and put it up on Canvas. If you do have any other questions, please email me at lbjcareers@austin.utexas.edu, and I hope you have a great rest of the week.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.